2 minutes did become 2 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over now to one of the student leaders who's going to kind of moderate this session. That's Isaac O'Neill. And so I will, look at this. He's going to come. I'm going to take that mic. No, there it is. I'm going to take the bad microphone away, and I'm going to turn it over to Isaac. So,
is this one working?
Got to turn it on. Oh. There we go.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody, good evening. On behalf of all the student leaders, I want to thank all of you for coming and attending our little program. We have some interesting things that we want to try out with all of you. If you've ever heard of the game Four Corners, the idea is that we have a question that we're going to ask you, and you are going to self-sort yourselves into these different corners based on your answers. We have our helpful student leaders over here. They're going to have numbers in each of these corresponding corners. So 1 over here is going to be in that corner. 2 is going to be over in this corner. 3 is back there. 4 is over here. And so depending on your responses to these questions that I'm going to ask you, you're going to sort yourselves into these. And the idea is that then we're going to talk a little bit amongst ourselves about why we chose these answers. So I'd recommend that you all get up, get ready for some movement. This is going to be fun, I promise. Okay, so.
You can leave your stuff where it is. You don't have to take all your belongings.
Thank you, Shaver. Yep. All right, so we're going to begin. So this is going to stay the same. Your answer for always is always going to be there. Sometimes, rarely, never. It's always going to be the same. For our first question, how often do you get your news from social media? I think if I do this slide, yep, right there, so you don't forget it. And the idea is you're going to sort yourselves into these different corners based on what your answer is. So find your number, sort yourselves, and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion amongst yourselves facilitated by our student leaders. Go. It's fun, I promise. Go do it.
That's a lot of sometimes.
Sometimes. All right. Yeah, and so now that we're in these groups, the idea is we want you guys to talk amongst yourselves. Why are you there? Give us some examples. What are the thoughts going through your heads at these questions? Think about recent things for yourself. And hopefully our student leaders can help facilitate a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through each groups, and we're going to have, hopefully, a willing representative pop up from amongst you to talk a little bit about what you guys discussed. And I know that might be a little difficult from our sometimes group, but we'll figure something out. I want to hear from the always first. Tell us about what you guys discussed. What were the thoughts? What were the feelings?
In our case, I will speak slow. Hola. Hello. Okay, in our case, you can listen. Okay, in our case, we think always, but not just social media. This is the difference, because all of us we chose this part not because it's the only thing that we receive information. Maybe it's the most common, but not the only one. And because it's also more easy to get information while we're watching our TikTok, our Facebook, or something like that, it's more accessible to learn about it. And I share with them also, in my case, read the comment of people. Also, it's important because what the people are thinking about the new is important for us. This and also maybe generational thing, I'm not so sure, but we also use more this thing than before, not the newspaper, and I think it could be part of the reason.
So we've got some interesting possibilities there for some explanations. I like to hear it. Can we get some kind of coagulation from our sometimes group? I know this is going to be a little difficult. Also, does the mic work?
Hopefully. No.
All right, you're getting mine again.
Here you go. So we were the largest group, and I got 3 willing volunteers to share their experiences, so I'm excited.
So me and my partner, we talked about the fact that we first start on TikTok because that's where we tend to be. And then if a particular news source interests us, then we take the actual work to look for a longer source, maybe a more credible source outside of social media. But then we also talked about how for visual learners, for a lot of people like us in our age, it's easier to just watch a TikTok reel or something from a credible source rather than reading an article for every single piece of news that we come across. So it's like a balance.
So my partner and I talked a lot about how we will see initial stories on social media, and then we, like you guys were saying, do the work to then like find a New York Times or a Washington Post article that actually talks about the story. And we also mentioned like a little bit about local news, and that hearing stories from like Facebook groups or like a Nextdoor like app can be sometimes really difficult to navigate, like what your neighbors know and what you don't know. And again, just doing the work and putting forth the effort to find stories from credible sources.
I'm going to sound like an echo because my group said pretty much the same things of we start on the social media and we go and look at what we are interested. One thing that two of us agreed on is like on Instagram, the American Girl dolls posted, let's be honest, is this how you found out the Pope died? And I'm guilty of that. But also we agreed like, because we're so busy, because like I'm running around the classes, you had a commute to work, we get the short snippets that we can to stay informed. And like if we have time later, we'll go deeper into it. But yeah, it's basically what everyone else in our group kind of said.
Thank you guys. Okay. Can we hear from our rarelies then? I think that's over there, right? Oh. You guys are, I can't see the, oh. Oh yeah, sorry, I gotta walk over there.
Okay, so for us, a lot of the things that we talked about was one, that we don't really use social media that much to begin with. And so when it comes to getting our news, if we do use social media, like for me, for example, I'm occasionally on Instagram, and so I'll see the post and then go follow up with like the news source or things like that. But we kind of turn towards news outlets. And also like for me, for Delaware Online, I look for things in Delaware, things that are affecting us, but also nationally, it depends on what it is. But yeah. In general, not that much.
So that sounds a little similar to some of our sometimes, right? We got a little bit of a gray line here. I will admit these categories aren't the best. Do we have a working mic over there? No? All right. Runners.
Hello? Number 2. You got it.
What's social media? No, so so we in general don't use it. We don't have it. For those of us that do, it's just for our hobbies, things that we, and we also are the heretics who pay for subscriptions to news outlets.
All right, interesting. All right, so we'll ruminate on that a little bit with our next question. Then we're going to have to skip over something, sadly, because we're a little scrunched for time. But how often do you come across content on social media, or if you want to be like Phil, an obstinate prick, you can say media, or media generally, or maybe news, I don't care, that challenges your beliefs and opinions? So again, it's the same corners, mean the same things, and resort yourselves based on how you feel. Always, sometimes, rarely, never. And the question stays up here, so you can't lose it.
Here, I can read it for you. How often do you come across content on social media that challenges your existing beliefs or opinions?
And when you've arrived, start talking to people.
Yeah.
We're going to do this again.
Yeah, you seek it out. I want to hear about that. So what's the time recently that you sought out like something that was different?
We're getting a signal on our board.
Yeah.
That's me tapping it right there on the screen. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
Ask the information. But if I do like get information that kind of contradicts what I believe, then I will change my mind because I feel like that's valuable.
All right. So first of all, do we have working mics this time?
Yeah.
You're good? Naomi? Okay.
Yes. Is it this one? Yeah.
Morgan's in deep discussion. Does your mic work? Okay,
Yes,
good.
it
Awesome.
does.
All right. Great. I don't have to run now. Okay. So I suppose the negative way of asking this question is how siloed are you? And so I imagine some groups maybe got into something akin to that a little bit, especially maybe our rarelies and nevers. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you guys feel about this topic. So let's start. Let's start again. Same way.
Do you want to talk about your intentional non-silent?
I mean, so I don't see things that challenge my beliefs unintentionally. You know, it's not organic. I have to go and look for it, but I deliberately do that and then see it.
It's a good way of like answering this, right? Like you might not see things based on your social media intake, right? But plenty of people go look for things that they disagree with to keep themselves informed. Like there are all kinds of sponsorships now that I've seen for like ground news or whatever that you increase the breadth of news sources that you intake. Let's hear from Sometimes.
Okay, we talked about how we're not, again, always looking for these types of media, but the fact that we get very extreme sides of both spectrums of the political side. So sometimes it'll be very liberal one day, and then the next day be super conservative. So I'm not sure exactly how the algorithm's working in that sense, but we do get both sides.
So we talked about how we wind up being in a lot of different spheres that necessarily don't have the same viewpoint on a lot of current events. So we wind up with some portions of our social media aspect being things that agree and some being disagreeing. And there's also the aspect of the comments, like whether they're agreeing with what the post is saying. So even if the post is something I disagree with, maybe the comments are something I agree with or vice versa, and that's kind of where we discuss receiving stuff that's not necessarily like that challenges what we believe.
I'm just going to keep it moving here. Over to Faiza then.
Similar to what the other groups were saying, a lot of what we encounter is what the algorithm feeds us, so rarely will you come across a post that kind of conflicts with your belief. But a lot of people in the group were saying that it does make them think a little more and kind of change their perspectives because they're being exposed to a different opinion.
Okay. Morgan?
Well, since we started with never using it, the question becomes already answered. But I think our feeling was that we have limited amount of time, and we want to go to sources that we trust and look for whatever's there and hope that if you're reading the New York Times or the Washington Post or listening to NPR, that you are getting positions that may challenge your existing beliefs but may reinforce. But what we're really after is the truth, and we don't have time for palaver.
I think that's a very pertinent point, definitely, because I mean, I have limited time. I don't want to go out of the way seeking things I don't like, right? That kind of seems paradoxical. It's funny that we treat news like a thing, you know, you should go out of your way to go and see, but not everyone has the energy or the time. So sadly, that is all for us. I'd love to do this all day, but we want to get a student panel up here now, actually. So if you could return to your seats, hopefully where you left everything, and I'll invite our student panelists up to introduce themselves. All right, now, I know that was a lot, so once again, I'm Isaac. I'm an SNF student leader. I have a couple other members with the student panel on me, up with me today, and I'd like to have them introduce themselves. Tell them a little bit about yourselves, each of you in turn.
Hi, everybody. Is this quiet, loud enough?
It's going to be a little quiet. I don't know what's up with the mics, but
My name is Lauren Boyd. I'm the managing news editor of UD's independent student newspaper, The Review. Yeah, some fun facts. I'm from Southern California, so it's a little different. Other than that, I think that's all you guys need to know.
Hi everyone, my name's Naija. I am an SNF Paideia fellow who goes to the University of Pennsylvania. So excited to be here today. I am also a student reporter. So I'm an academic affairs beat reporter for the Daily Pennsylvanian, which is our on-campus publication.
Hi everyone, my name is Naomi Maria. I am an SNF Ithaca student leader here at the University of Delaware. I am a public policy major as well as completing my MPA with the 4+1 program, and I also work with the CIE of Center of Intercultural Engagement.
Wonderful. All right. So I hate icebreakers, but the first question is a little bit of that because you guys are all interacting with media in some way. And it's pretty broad, so answer it kind of however you want. What role does media play in your life?
So I'll start off. I think, like everyone else and being a part of Gen Z, media is an everyday occurring thing for me. I think we lived in a very interesting time of it being introduced with us and it being a part of our upbringing, how we choose to connect, how we socialize with other people, and as well as me having family from a different country, WhatsApp is something I constantly use to just keep updated and constantly be in contact with them.
Yeah, happy to go second. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I do write for my school's newspaper, so media is a really big part of my life and being able to not only just stay engaged with news on my campus and federally, but also just generally to stay in touch with people in everyday life.
Yeah, again, just kind of reiterating those thoughts. I'm obviously engaged in news media as well through the review. I do think that as I've grown older, I've seen media kind of creep its way into all facets of life. So I think that's certainly something that I've seen change over time. But yeah, I would say it's pretty expansive.
So something that the two of you actually touched on was, so like basically as time has progressed, more and more people are getting at least some of their news media from like more non-traditional forms of media, off of Instagram, off of TikTok, off of Snapchat, that sort of thing. We saw that plenty with our Four Corners event. So many people were in those sometimes. That's really interesting. I have in 2024, a Pew Research study found that just over half of US adults say they at least sometimes get news from social media. How do you guys feel about that? What are the takes?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point with just the level of social media use in general, it would be pretty impossible for that to not be the case. And one thing I think about with that is just like the presentation of news media and how that's kind of been folded into other types of social media without people maybe realizing it. I think about, you know, like as a kid going to a newsstand physically with my dad, it's very clear to see, you know, what People magazine is bringing to us or what the New York Times is bringing to us or the LA Times or whatever it may be. And I think that's one of the things that has kind of changed our interaction with news media through social media is that a lot of times it's a little bit more covert and it's maybe harder to realize what short form video is bringing you well reported, well vetted news and what short form video is maybe not. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point, and I want to add on especially the convenience, which I believe brought up a little bit in the group discussions earlier. There's so much convenience to social media and how it gives you quick information in such a short period of time, especially in fast-moving days where you do want to stay in touch with current news, you do want to know what's going on, but may not have the time to pick up a full article or go in a deep dive and be able to figure out, oh, what's this giving me versus a different news publication or a different form of media. So I would definitely say convenience is another way that social media is bringing a lot of news into everyday life in different formats.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with those points, and I also agree with the point of just accessibility. Who is able to understand news media, and how is it being digestible for them to understand? For example, my parents are both from Dominican Republic, and for me, something that was prominent was my mom learning how to speak English just by watching the news. A lot of the times also, there wasn't news coverage on certain areas. There wasn't news coverage for differing populations. So sometimes people would go on YouTube trying to find any news sources or information, but a lot of the times those aren't reliable sources. So I think there is a level of importance of people being able to just understand things through Instagram, maybe it's through WhatsApp, in terms of just allowing them to have an understanding of what's happening within their community if there aren't news platforms that are catered to them specifically.
So I think you guys are touching on something interesting here. do you guys think that perhaps more informal forms of media through these social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat are superseding traditional forms of media and how everyone gets their news, even if you're not necessarily directly exposed to these things? It can often shape the environments that you're in different ways as well, I think. I'd like to hear you guys talk on that.
Yeah, one thing that, and I don't know that this directly answers your question, but one thing that I think about is that as somebody who's 20 years old, I am, if not the first, one of the first generations to grow up with technology, and to grow up, I think primarily, I mean, when I was a kid, I would read traditional paper news a little bit, but really by the time I was old enough to be engaged with it, I was consuming that digitally. And one thing that I find interesting about that is that I think it has changed the way young people, myself included, write the news. And there's just certain things that, you know, if you haven't been exposed to news writing as a young person, you're likely to not know how to do it as an adult. So I think that even though not everybody is engaging with the news via social media, the way that the news is presented has changed because of social media and because of the way that the next generation of journalists has engaged in it through their childhoods and adolescence. So.
Wait, I actually really want to jump off of that point. So Lauren and I were talking a bit earlier because we were over in the Sometimes group for the entire session, but we were talking about how our news publications have different ways of putting stories online. And specifically, I talked about my experience with the DP and the fact that a lot of our breaking news articles or a lot of our high-scale articles typically end up posted on Instagram with the headline, a picture that usually ends up on the article, and then a short blurb along with the person who wrote it. And I think we were both mentioning a lot about how we were thinking about how that news is presented, how different news platforms tend to write a few paragraphs or a very short blurb in that description, and how much does it affect people who are willing to take that link, click it, and read the full article versus are only looking at that small snippet and taking so much information from it. And I think it was really interesting to kind of think about how much people are willing to engage with that sort of content, and even though it is very accessible and it's there and it tells you that this article is live and you can explore it, who's willing to take that step to read the full thing?
Yeah, and I think it touches on the point of news being adaptable and also trying to cater to a certain audience and a certain generation of people, and there's importance of that. Like I said before, how do we make news digestible? How do we allow it to reach a certain audience as well cater to maybe certain attention spans? I think when it comes to news, we are the consumers, and I think it's viewed as a business, obviously. How do they cater to who they want to read these news sources? How do we make this something interesting, entertaining? I know a lot of us has mentioned maybe we're on Instagram, maybe we're TikTok. I know I am so guilty of finding some of my news sources on Instagram and TikTok. There's Shade Room, all of those other sources, and I think for me, throughout my busy week and my busy days, I think just being able to scroll on and just see something and I have a quick idea and maybe later just search on and make sure it's authentic, make sure it's real, because there can be misinformation there.
Yeah, and I think just adding on to that really quickly, I think that really signals the need for traditional news groups, mine included, to do a better job of really filling that void on social media and trying to establish our presence on social media a little bit more significantly, because ultimately that is where people are going, and there's going to be a decision that everybody makes, whether it's conscious or not, to choose to buy into the takes of, to say it, I guess, gracefully, maybe less researched, less reliable opinions versus those that have been ethically and, you know, professionally sourced.
Okay. Kind of piggybacking on all of this, so we have a course at UD called Citizen Civility and Change, and in that course we participated in a program called Unify America, and the idea was that you got paired up with a random person from a random college in America, and you had to go through and take a little quiz about like your takes on different politically charged subjects. And I remember distinctly that there's like this, it's very difficult to connect with people with differing political views from yours, obviously. But in what ways can we maybe use social media to circumvent that? Or do you guys think that social media is like, it's no longer good for that? Is social media, like you guys are saying, is it kind of becoming a quagmire that we can't really penetrate with traditional forms of media anymore?
Yeah, I will say that there's a certain algorithm, and I think when you scroll, it picks up on what you like and what you don't like. And I think for me personally, growing up in the Bronx, New York, I was around a lot of people who had similar political beliefs as I did. And it wasn't until coming to Delaware and coming and being a part of different groups and exposing myself to differing political opinions, I was able to be exposed to that and broaden my own ideology as well as understand why other people had those ideologies. I wouldn't say that social media impacted that or supported that conversation of dialogue. However, I do think taking certain courses, being in certain environments in which I am dissecting my mind and just dissecting the implicit bias that I might have initially have to have an open conversation and understand someone else is what really helped.
Yeah, I think that the dialogue aspect is a little bit difficult, particularly because of like just the aggressive nature of, from what I've seen, Instagram comments. So I don't know that it's necessarily the best place to do that, because I think the nature of the screen prevents us from having the kindness or the compassion that we would otherwise have. But I do think that there is a space for news media to inform this, but just generally for coalition building. Thinking of a recent example at UD, we've had a slew of really, really tragic traffic accidents on Main Street, and another one happened this week. But because of that happening, but also because the Review was able to get a story out that was presented through social media, it was a pretty widely spread and widely engaged issue, and there was a Change.org petition. I think it had like 8,000 signatures, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But kind of as a result, we've had members of the UD community, administrators meeting with DelDOT and a few other state organizations. So I do think that there's room for like that kind of interactive change making, I guess, space on social media. I don't know how much of it engages with dialogue or if it's just a place for people to kind of collect together.
Yeah, definitely reflecting on that, I would say social media is a very hard space to get that sort of concrete dialogue, especially as Lauren mentioned, it's behind a screen. There's less personability there, and there's more opportunity for that distance to kind of be formed where you're not interacting with somebody who you can see face to face. And I think that says a lot about the ability for social media to kind of coagulate and bring together a lot of ideas in ways that might accentuate or elevate to them in ways that bring more attention to one side versus another. And that's very different from having a dialogue in person. And those sorts of conversations aren't always possible over social media, but it gives a lot of attention to the fact that news outlets or different organizations can kind of step into that void and help to sort of facilitate that or make space for dialogue or even bringing issues to attention.
So tangential to that, last week there was tragedy on Main Street that resulted in a fatality and several injuries. And we discussed this individually before of how the story of this event was perpetrated widely on social media with many different false claims very quickly. How can news media be used to combat misinformation like this when people so willingly want to grab for any kind of story that they can get their hands on? What can be done to combat this?
Yeah, I think in the case of the instance that you referred to here, I think it's really important to acknowledge that when people are looking for information, it is oftentimes out of a sense of fear or perceived danger, and in this case that significantly applies. And so I think understanding that, the best thing that we can do as journalists is try and fill, as I mentioned earlier, that void as quickly as possible, which is certainly difficult because, you know, we're students, so we have busy days and we're kind of pulling double duty a little bit. But ultimately, if we're not providing people with accurate information, we can't really be upset that they are choosing to believe inaccurate information. I also will say that I do think the kind of the rumor mill surrounding things like this has been pretty expedited by social media and has really been inflamed by that. So I think it's a little bit of a difficult thing because not only is it harder for us to kind of get in early, the problem is becoming worse. But yeah, I think speed is the key on that one. And I will also say that's not just directed at journalists. I think the university has a responsibility to do that as well, and I know that there's some legality issues about providing too much information when things like that happen, but ultimately, again, people are scared or feel in danger, things like that, and it's our responsibility as journalists and as administrators, their responsibility to really try and disseminate information that's reliable and factual as quickly as possible.
No, I definitely strongly second that point. The role that student journalism serves on a campus is just so important, increasingly more so important, especially from the DP's perspective. Where we stand on our campus is that we are a voice for issues, for topics, and for things that people want to know about. And yes, it is very much a role where we are the ones to get that information out, and being able to say we can get trustworthy, reliable information out, multiple sources, and be able to give that information to our community is something that's really valuable to us, especially either working with administration or working in spaces where that information just isn't there just yet.
Yeah, and just discussing the incident, the way that I heard it was I was at my apartment and I live by Main Street, so there is a bunch of cars. The cars were all backed up, and my roommates come running in, and there's differing opinions. Some people are hearing stuff from Snapchat, maybe their friends, maybe Instagram, maybe they're getting text messages. So I tried searching up any news to see what's occurring, what's happening, what's going on. I tried texting people, making sure if they were okay or not, and I think it was very concerning not to know what was happening, to only know that there is police sirens around, that there is a lot of traffic, and that everyone was asking each other if they were okay or not. And it wasn't until the day afterwards that there is media about it that I realized what would happen, because before that, people were making up stories, trying to piece things together, trying to make a sense of what was occurring in front of them.
We've seen a decline in the trust of news media over the last couple decades. As of 2024, 36% of adults cited having no trust at all in the media, based on a Gallup poll. How have you seen this play out on campus news sources, and what feedback have you received regarding levels of trust on your campus or in the student news space in general?
I would definitely say for this, kind of back to the point of like news, campus news especially, we do our best, and I can say that I think for multiple publications, if you want to comment on this in a second, Lauren, but publications do a lot to try to verify as much information as possible, make sure that we have multiple sources, have multiple people to talk about topics that we're interested in writing about, and making it very clear that when we are writing about news, we are making sure that we're getting to the news that multiple people can support and attest to, versus what can be seen as like an opinion article or something that's more of a lighthearted sort of write and read. I would say for us, the way that we're thinking about information on campus is, because the DP is the primary news source on our campus for campus news, that we take a lot of pride in making sure that there are every step taken possible to make sure that we're verifying information, and through our student journalists, being able to teach them how to combat misinformation, how to make sure that their writing accurately reflects what they want to get across and what the people on their campus should know about the news that's going on. And I think all of those things are different, not barriers, but different sort of steps towards combating misinformation on campus and working to ensure that there's trust in what we're putting out.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's endless rules that we follow that anybody that isn't in a news organization really wouldn't know, to no fault of their own. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't necessarily realize that journalists have rules to follow, and so they just assume that journalists are out there like willy-nilly publishing things as the same way that maybe somebody on TikTok or Instagram is. And I think that's kind of a critical difference, is that, you know, we have liability and obviously need to be thoughtful about our own, the sanctity of our organization, and that really informs the way that we publish and disseminate information. Kind of leaning off of that too, I think part of the problem, at least for us at UD, is that the review, especially I think as we've entered the digital age, has really, I guess, limited, the digital age, I should say, has limited our outreach. There was a time when the review was putting out 2 print copies a week, which I truly can't imagine the amount of work that goes into that, because we do one a month and it feels overwhelming. But a lot of our classmates don't know about the review. They don't know that it exists. They have no idea that we have a student newspaper, and I think that's another generational issue that we kind of have, where people, there would have certainly, I can't speak for those older than me, but I assume a time when it would have just been obvious that every school had a student newspaper, because that would be the norm, and what else would you have done without a newspaper? You would have no way to get the news. And because of, I think, the lean and progression into social media, that isn't really the expectation, and so people doesn't occur to people that we have a newspaper. And because of that, the reputation of the Review, it's not that it has lessened, but it just doesn't really exist because people don't think about it, which makes it hard for us to establish ourselves as a respectable, responsible, and professional news source. So, yeah.
I do not have a journalism background, but I've gained a lot of respect for journalism by being able to go to summits like this and be able to interact with journalists and hear the importance of media. And I heard that media is another pillar of democracy, and there's importance of having media. And unfortunately, we are in an apolitical campus at times in which media might not be a priority for some people. So it comes to question of how do we again make it digestible? How do we again make sure that we're reaching a student population that will not want to read the Review, but make it interesting enough and be able to go into classrooms and market the Review? Because I'm in a journalism class right now, and brilliant minds, I love how passionate they are about what they're reporting, and I love that they are trying their best, and I just wish there was more publication for it because y'all are doing such a great job.
So World Press Freedom Day was 2 days ago now, and all over the world we're seeing what appears to be a decline in the freedom of journalism and of the freedom of reporters to go and report on stories that make sense. Do you think that the future of reporting is in danger even on like our college campuses? Maybe it sounds a little quaint, but seriously.
No, yeah. No, thank you for the question. I think it's hard to predict what the future would look like right now, and I kind of don't even want to try because there's so many variables that would vastly change what that looks like. I will say, reporting on some of the Trump administration's policies, we had 8 students had their visas canceled here, and reporting on that led me to act a lot more cautiously than I ever have. I've in the past sent casual emails to professors or sources being like, hey, do you know anything about this? No big deal. And that's just not something that I would do at this point because I see no reason to bring anybody else into the potential target zone than needs to be. So yeah, I will say it's certainly something that's changing and that I'm more aware and cautious of. But as far as the future, I couldn't begin to even imagine what it could or couldn't look like.
Okay. I think I think we just have enough time for a couple questions now, if we're willing. In the back.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your comments. I have a question about what you see as what role AI is going to play for those of you who are student journalists. How are you going to tackle that? And for everybody as a consumer of news, where do you see the role that AI is going to play?
I'm totally happy to jump on this one first. So from more of an internal perspective, what we're told as part of our beat reporters and to all of the reporters that we take on, especially our new ones every semester, is that AI is completely not allowed in writing. We have multiple sources of checkers. We ensure that everything is up to standard. We have multiple forms of copy editors, individual editors who go through and make sure that the writing is authentic and human written. And that's just one of the ways that we ensure that everything that we put out is student produced. We take pride in being a very student-led group. Kind of more on like the administrative side of it, like everyone from our executive editor down is just all students. So we take a lot of pride in us producing our own content, making sure that's not AI, and taking very specific action against people who are found to write using AI. But I would definitely agree, it's becoming an increasing concern, especially in the larger topic of misinformation, disinformation that we've talked about today, where we can't really say that all of the news sources that we're getting, especially some of the things from social media, are 100% verified, and that just calls into question how more and more people should be aware of fact-checking or looking to other sources to be able to look at the veracity of what they're taking in.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Completely agree. Not allowed. we haven't had an issue with it, I will say, because most people that are in the review are there because they like it. We don't get paid. It's all like a lot of work, to be quite honest with you, that we are really passionate about. So we haven't had an issue with it because people are there because they want to be there.
Any other questions?
This question's it's for Naomi, but maybe for the whole group. I really liked what you said about dissecting the implicit bias in your own mind, and I wondered if you feel like the ability to do that is something that you can do online, or do you feel like you need to be more person to person? Is that something that tends to happen in spaces that involve human interaction, or do you see hope for that or room for that online?
Good question. I foresee it being possible if there was platforms that specifically cater to people in those regards. The reason I mentioned dissecting your mind is because I'm in the CIE, which is the diversity space in which we have workshops and we interact with people and we have constant conversations on topics in which they might not have heard before. What is diversity? What is inclusion? What are these words that we hear? And we allow students to have a space by conducting conversation and moderating conversation and having certain questions to allow people to maybe question, what did they grow up with? What are some ideas, thoughts that you might have heard before that you haven't quite necessarily challenged? And I think if we had websites or forums, you mentioned before, like Unify America, that really tries to reach a group and audience to allow them to just tackle what they grew up with, I think that would be a good space to do it.
I don't have anything to add. That was a perfect response.
I think we're out of time. So. Thank you guys for coming up here. Thank you all for attending this. This was great to see everybody and to hear everyone's responses and to hear from our student panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Let's give a round of applause again to these great students for getting up on the stage.